The question is, what's the number one enemy of your property for you to be able to maintain it properly and in good shape? Let's have a look. That number one enemy is a silent destroyer, and is water. And when you have a property, when you're running a property for rental purposes, even if the property where you live, any water in the wrong place is going to start damaging it. But the damage can come in different forms, can be in different shapes. And I want to show you today the kind of designs that are put in place from a normal property to try to turn water away from the wrong places, and some of the problems we are dealing with at the moment, just as an example, and some more things that can be put into the design of your properties to try to improve this a lot. And I will show you a little bit about the costs that getting this wrong or this sort of water attack can happen for your property and obviously for your pocket. Let's have a look. Now, water can come from different places, from the outside or from the inside. And both of them, if the property is not well designed, is not well maintained, is going to cause problems for you. The first and biggest external threat, to be honest, because of the volume that it can bring into your property, is the external threats right there. So the moisture entering from rain, probably if you know, there is something called driving rain, which is not all rain comes vertically. Some rain comes inclined or in different directions because of the wind. And that's very important to understand, because if you have a roofer that let some gaps into your design, or maybe time and wear and tear have created those gaps, then effectively the water will be able to go through a gap that wouldn't actually normally do if it's vertical, but if it's driving rain, it can go in, and that can have an effect. So all that needs to happen. So you can have water from the sky coming down, rain, but also you can have water coming up from the ground. And being properties as they are, being bricks, the kind of sponges that they are, they will just take water and then distribute it across different parts of the house. And then because of osmosis and different processes, then that water will move into the contact parts. For example, bricks would be in contact with wood plates, and if those are not separated by an impermeable layer, then it will transfer to the wood and then carry on from there. So kind of moisture and water can walk across your property, and I will show you actually a way that nature has found to actually kind of walk for certain problems, to walk across your property, if I can call it that way. Now, all these leaks, all these defects, everything that happens because of the environment, for example, in my house at the moment, I have a gutter that birds used to use to stay there and just see and search for food or for water or for anything they were searching. And their weight basically dislodged that gutter. Now I have a problem which I've got quotes, 200, 300 pounds so far to fix that. Thank you, Bert, to do it. And all that comes as a problem for your property. A property is never an isolated module. It always is under the conditions of the environment. So that's very important to understand. Your property is suffering every time. Now, there is internal generation of water from tenants, from the person who are living there. You have respiration, you have cooking, you have showering, exercising inside, and you have condensation as well from different from the air itself. Even when you open the door and you bring air in, all air has some moisture. And there are some percentages we will discuss so you know the impact of this. And actually, this has an important impact when, for example, looking at properties to buy, like when you're doing a buy-to-let, for example. So that's very important to understand. Now, let's have a look at this. This is a diagram of a property. And as an investor, this is important for you to know that there are lots of different items, features that are built inside a property for you or for the property to be able to put direct water away from your property to ensure it doesn't touch or reduce the likelihood of touching important structural parts of your property, because the accumulation of that water will create problems, as we will see in a second. So now, for example, some of the important parts that you have. So you have the roof, obviously, which is the slated roof right here. You just have the gutters, which will collect the water from the roof and put it inside down pipes, which then will turn the water away from the property. And that's super critical to take into account, because if water starts coming into contact with the walls, then the first thing that starts suffering is the paint, and then the the bricks, and then any wood that's contact with it, and any plastering, all that starts suffering. And it's important to move that water away. The other one is the flashings. You see this bit gray color at the bottom of the chimney. That's lead. And lead is put in there because those joints are very difficult to seal. And one of the best ways that has been found through history is to put some lead between the joints of chimneys and roof, between different inclinations of roof as well, to create some channels. And all that lead will create a channel, or will divert water away from those crevices, from those joints, which otherwise will take water and allow it into the property. That's flashing, and you can see all over, not just chimneys, you can see it around some windows, especially the ones that are on roofs for lofts conversion. You can see that. You can also see it on some other windows right there. And those flashings are very important. And because of acid rain, for example, those flashings with time will degrade, will be destroyed, and then you need to look at it. Unfortunately, one of the most important parts of the house, which is the roof, is something that you cannot easily see fully. And that's a big problem. Now, other aspects of the property for it to help you out to remove water is effectively, it cannot be seen in this picture, but when you see roofs and you see this edge here, is kind of a different inclination. So the water that goes to the end of the roof actually is returned back and directed towards the gutters. And that's an important part. The other important part I just mentioned is the gutters themselves. Those are channels that run across every place where the roof is, and where you can see houses that have plants growing out of the gutters, then you can see no maintenance is being done, and you can see that property suffering. Inside, the property suffering and is causing a lot of issues. One that is not shown here is, for example, when you have brick walls, which are taller than the roof, you would have a brick wall here. Then normally the top of that brick wall is finished with some sort of masonry. And the masonry there is effectively to avoid that water coming, rainwater actually hits the top of the bricks, and then is water being absorbed from the top down, and that will affect the whole building. So it's not just decorative, it's also trying to avoid that the brick itself absorbs water. And this is kind of related, but the other way around, with the dam-proof course that I will show you in a second, which is this, that to avoid moisture coming from the ground. So effectively, brick is a sponge, you can call it that way. Water can come from the bottom up, and or can come from the up down, which is basically from the top down, which is will distribute water across your property. That's very important to know. So this is called the DPC, which you have here, which is the dam proof course. And it's basically a layer that is put between a section, the lower section of a brick wall, and the top section for it to stop any water that's coming from the ground. The ground always has water, and to stop it coming from up here. So that's a very important part of the process. Item that is built into the property to remove water as much as possible, and to avoid accumulation, is the air bricks. These little kind of grids that you see underneath the properties, your properties, they are designed for air to come under the house, dry all the wood that normally is inside a house, which is supporting a lot of the house. And if the house has floor beams, which basically support the property, and lots of Victorian houses would have that. And these air bricks, normally you would have at the front and at the back. So air comes in and out and takes moisture away. The problem with many properties is that these are overlooked. They get blocked with rubbish and with time and dirt, and what air doesn't flow through anymore. Therefore, you start having rot those in those beams, in those wooden beams. And if the property was not built correctly and there was no damp-proof course applied, then you have a bigger problem right there, which needs to have to be taken care of. And if you have internal leaks in the property from the plumbing, from anything that's actually not set correctly, and bear in mind that things in a property move around with use, then those leaks can actually reach the wood and then start affecting it. So effectively, the amount of wood and plaster and electrics that there are in a property, those are the victims of the water that we're trying to stop from this whole process. Now, the chimney pot, obviously, you have this here, which is to avoid water coming directly into the chimney. Also, the one that you don't see here underneath the roof. I mean, the slates are designed so they transfer water, they allow water just to go reach the gutters. And then underneath the roof, you have a membrane which should allow the property to breathe through it, but no water to come down in. And why? Is because the internal water generation that we talked about, all that water needs to go somewhere. And one of the ways to do that is to put this membrane, which is across the whole roof. If the property is modern, you'll see it. If the property is very old, there won't be such a thing, apart from a membrane that probably is not doing that job. But that's a very important part of the whole process. And also, apart from that, you'll see in the roof, you must see little gaps in the roof, and then you'll see real gaps on the fascias as well here, for example, or underneath the soffit, which is underneath the fascia. This is the fascia. And all those are places where air can flow freely but securely from the property and remove that water. Very important to have that into a property. Also, other parts that you see but might not connect with this is the window sills. The water that comes from rain and from the window itself, the window sills are designed to get that water out of the property without hopefully touching too much the walls, and that helps put water away from the property. Also, there are systems like French drains, which is basically drains that are built next to the property, is basically rock ditch with rock, which will allow water to dissipate into the ground as fast as possible and hopefully away from the base of the property itself. So again, the play here is to take that water, direct it away from the property in different means, in different ways. You have the porch as well, which is also kind of helps in that process. You have the downpipes and you have the sealant that goes into the downpipes. If any of these downpipes disconnects and breaks, the water will go into the wall and it would have bypassed the whole thing. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. Also, some properties, not all of them, have something called soakaways, which is a place where water is directed. So you could have all this. You could have French drains, but you can also have soakaways, which is kind of, you can see it like a hole in the ground filled with rocks of different sizes, and rainwater is sent to that soakaway. So when there is a lot of water, then it can have time to go into the ground and is not going to flood the property and again cause all these problems. So there is lots of these features in properties, and modern properties are a lot better in having more of these ones to maintain them dried. A modern property will have a lot less moisture content inside. The air is a lot drier than the ones before. And there's a lot of benefits to this, which we will discuss in a minute. But for you to know, these are the main considerations. If I'm forgetting any, which probably I have, just write on the comments that then just for us to discuss. But again, is how water is put away from the property. You could also mentioned, for example, the rendering of a property. That's a protective layer which needs to be breathable as well. This is important. The property needs to breathe. The design of a property needs to allow it to breathe so that moisture comes out. And that's why you start talking about breathable rendering or external paint, breathable vinyl inside the property. When you talk about extraction, air extraction inside the property, which we'll discuss in a minute, when you start talking about windows trickles, so at the top of windows in the UK, you have little kind of gaps you can open and close, and those will allow air to come through, and that allows the property to breathe. Now, the problem in the UK and other countries that have winter with water, there is an additional one, which is water. If that water stays in certain place, and then it freezes, then it will expand, and then structurally it will break different sections of the property. It can break, it can affect brick quite a lot. So that's a very important part to know. And that's why this is a silent killer. You see how your properties is suffering day in and day out from water ingress and from water condensation, from water freezing in the wrong places. Very, very important to bear in mind this. Now, as I said, gutters need to be maintained. That's a place we need to do. And then when you have a property where you see condensation all the time, then probably you need to think, or you should think about air extraction. That's where it comes. Now, let me show you also let me show you this video, which is something that happens as well in chimneys. This is a problem that we have at the moment with a property we are managing, and you can see how the property suffers. So I'll show you several things. So this property is not used, is supposed to be basically, is got a cover at the top, but is losing concrete. As you can see right there, it's losing concrete, and therefore we need to replace that. But it's not only that we need to replace. Well, they are actually, if we come back here, they were repairing these ridges here, these tile ridges, which they lost concrete on the base, and then driving rain would actually come in there and affect. But the thing with this chimney is that we had, for example, two contractors quoting to repair this. One was £600, the other one is £500. And that's another tip. Whenever you need to do a job, always ask at least 3 contractors, and you'll be amazed as to the range of prices. And don't forget to ask what they're going to do for that budget, because builders and these contractors, they are really good at just imagining or vaguely describe what they are going to do for that job in particular. And it's good that you get a detailed description of what the job entails or covers for you to understand what's happening. But in this case, as I said, we need to cover the concrete, but not only that, we need to service the walls of the chimney. So all this mortar that is here is replaced, at least is covered and is cleaned. I'll show you a picture later on of how the chimney should look at the end. But this chimney is one of the places where water is coming through. And this is not something you see from underneath. You need to have within your schedule a checklist, a task where you send a roofer to go and check, or you have now some roofers which basically have drones and they can actually go and check your property, sometimes for free, to get the quotation and have a look around as to what can happen in that property. So this is one example of the things we deal with on a day-to-day basis in our properties. Actual number. This damage is going to cost us £500 to fix. And £500 for a buy-to-let in up north could easily be 2 or 3 months of profit from a property, depending on the property. And then you see the impact of this. It can be quite important. And this servicing is going to last, properly done, it might last for 5 years. Now, the real big problem with water is that we use a lot of wood in our properties in the UK for property structurally, for roofs, for underfloors, for walls, for stud walls, for different bits. It's so much timber in a property in the UK, which doesn't happen in the same ratio in other properties in other countries. And this makes UK property is vulnerable, especially to water. And there are two types of problems that you can find in wood. One of them is dry rot. The other one is wet rot. Wet rot is, for example, if you have a tap leaking or a pipe leaking on top of a wooden bin, as you can see right here. Let me just put the pen again. Here, then that's wet rot. The wood will slowly decay. This is probably hardness. This white bit here is the hardness of water just being left there when the water dries away. This, as you can see already here, is getting the wood to lose its strength. And effectively, it might not catastrophic, but you'll see, for example, that floors will start to bend when you walk into a new property you want to buy, and you see the kind of floor is bouncy and it kind of goes down a little bit. That's probably the case. There is water, there is damp, and there is some wet rot in your properties. Now, there is another one which also needs some water to be created. But this one in itself, if is in combination with water presence and stagnated air, meaning the property is not breathing, then it's going to cause dried rot, which is effectively what you see here. It turns the wood into very, very brittle material. And the problem with wet rot, if it's not addressed and the property is not breathing, is that it can have this mycelium, these white strings, mycelium. They can travel through air and go into other parts of the building and be placed on wood, and therefore they will start the dry rot in other places in the building. And these little mycelium, these little strings, contain a little bit of moisture, which means they have everything they need to be successful at starting rot in your property. And that you see how things just start going downhill from then on. So need to be careful. Normally the threshold, and this is important, that if you have about 20% humidity, air, humidity, moisture content in the air, and then that transferring to the wood starts decaying. That's why when we go, for example, to see buy-to-let properties, we measure moisture on the walls as much as we can. And if that's about 16%, then we have a problem, and we know that the buy-to-let mortgage is going to have certain conditions there, and maybe they will give zero value to the property, depending on what happens and what can be achieved. So that's two enemies that can be created by this additional enemy, which is water. Our first enemy is water, and then kind of creates soldiers around your property. Now, as you know, these water and air, moist air, which is if it's not replacing the property, will have issues for your tenants. That's another one, which is respiratory issues, toxin mold, allergies. All of these affects not only the property, but the tenants, and is important for it to be addressed, because the amount of regulations that we've had introduced recently, and therefore this also affects you. Now, the problem also with water coming into the property gets to the insulation, for example, roof insulation. Once insulation is wet, it's not effective, and in fact, it will create a cold wall breach, which will, as you can see, this is cold here, it will transfer heat a lot faster through the inside the property to the outside, and then again your bills start going up, apart from the fact that your property starts suffering. And that's why water again needs to be kept out of the building, because exactly these reasons. Now, water is a lot of water generated during the property, and per day you can see that it can more or less 20 liters of water generated in a family of 4 in a property, from cooking, bathing, drying clothes, respiration, breathing, etc. There is lots of things happening here because of internal moisture. So you're trying to keep external moisture out, and removing internal moisture from your property. Very critical. Now, as you already saw with the chimney, one repair for the chimney could be about £500. On that same roof, we just paid another £500 to replace some slates and put some additional concrete on. So that's £1,000 for just one roof of a single let, and you can see the effect of this. Apart from that, we've had to pay for some painting, which has gone wrong because we didn't know why the painting or where the leak was coming from. We look at the roof and then we notice the issues. So the whole thing, just for water to this investor, for water ingress, is going to cost about £2,000. But again, the important part of this is to do preventative maintenance as much as possible to reduce these costs to the property. And obviously, if that happens and you have a refinancing for your buy-to-let, you probably won't be able to do it. They will ask you to repair it before they do the new valuation, and it just will cost you a lot. That's where it comes from. Now, in terms of progression of water damage, if we talk about day one when the water ingressed, then you can see that from week one, you start have paint being damaged. Then you can month one, mold spores start to be created, and then in 1 year you'll have structural issues in your property. So if you have preventative maintenance in place in your property, very likely that you will avoid a lot of this. And it's very critical that you look at the different areas, and especially taking into account those critical design items that are put in place to drive water away. That's exactly what you need to look at. Now, the prevention and mitigation happens as I already mentioned, is preventative maintenance. This is an example of how a chimney looks like after servicing. It looks neatly covered on the top, and the mortar on the joints is protected, is good. The flashings here are working well, and the roof is well set and working the way it needs to work. Now, if your property is not using a chimney and you can remove it, you might need to apply for planning, then that might be a better option other than being paid managing something that you're not using. That might be one reason, but that's preventative maintenance. The other one is, and you see this a lot in modern properties, you don't see this in old properties. This is an actual picture of an extraction fan that we are installing in one of our HMOs. We are making a HMO at the moment. One of their projects we're working on is a 6-bed, 6-bathroom HMO. And this is a fan that is placed at the top on the loft. And this fan is extracting air from different points in the property. For us, we're going to extract air from each room, and this is extracting around 140 cubic meters per hour, which is double as much as regulation, and will keep the property as dry as possible. And this extraction alone, will help the property enormously to avoid a lot of the problems that we have discussed here. This for a property might cost you £8,000, £10,000, but in the long term, it will help tremendously for tenant health, for property health, and for your pocket health as well, definitely. And this is what I'm talking about, is you need to understand that your property is a breathing entity, is a breathing machine that needs to be maintained, and you need to give it a little bit of help in terms of how that property works to remove all the water and to keep any water away from the ground, from the sky, from inside the tenants, from pipes that go into the property, etc., etc., etc. So that's your job, is to keep that property dry as an investor, so your pocket doesn't leak, if I can put it that way. Now, hopefully that gave you a little bit of value, and it will improve and help you on your journey towards property investment, wherever you want to get. My name is Noel Cardona. This is propertycashflow.co.uk. Send me a message to info@propertycashflow.co.uk, or send me a WhatsApp to 07411904124, and happy to have a conversation with you. Book a free call to discuss any of your needs. Do you need properties managed around Liverpool, Wirral, or other places? Let me know. Do you want to invest in Liverpool, Wirral, other cities of the country? Do let me know. Happy to discuss that, and happy to provide some help during your journey. Thank you very much, and see you later.